Hey friends, this is Dan and Stephanie Burke. You're watching Behind the Scenes Divine Intimacy Radio. And today we're going to be talking about Devil in the Castle, the Fifth Mansions, FIFTH. Fifth Mansion and the temptations in that mansion, how the enemy works. It's a big chapter. It's got a lot to cover. But before we jump in there, I want to tell you, if you want to buy advanced copies of Devil in the Castle, you can still get them. You can go to Sophia Institute Press and put in Castle 25, CASTLE, then the number 25. You can get 25% off of pre-orders. When the book is published, you can get 50% off if you buy a case of them. They're even hardbacks. So that's awesome. So anyway, help us get the word out. I do think, gosh, the last three books I've written are a powerhouse of help for the soul, Into the Deep, Spiritual Warfare and Discernment of Spirits. And then this one is probably my favorite, although maybe it's not true that all my last books are my favorite that I write, but the last two I've really liked a lot. But anyway, just was deeply blessed by writing them, and I think you'll be blessed by reading them, and you'll get set free of a lot of junk. So I think that's good enough. We have a lot of events coming up. Head out to SpiritualDirection.com/events. Great courses at the Avila Institute. Check those out. Bible and the Revelation of Prayer and Why All People Suffer are two. And the Why All People Suffer course is great because it'll help you understand how to deal with suffering from a Catholic perspective. So,
Yeah.
Dr.
Can I
Paul
say
Shalhoub.
something?
Yeah.
So something very, very cool that we discovered is we dug into our data from last year. So 2021, is we had this huge uptick in classes. When we started our very first class with Avila with 54, 58 students years and years ago. And now we have over 600 students a quarter in each one of those, rolling classes of students, and they can pick and choose what they want to take. So it's not like you come in and you have to follow a certain path. People come and pick and take the courses that they want to take. But what was beautiful is we discovered that we had over 700 brand new students last year in 2021. It is amazing. It's huge.
Part of it's COVID.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
The enemy does one thing and the Lord always brings through.
Hey, you have COVID, you're isolated. Hey, go get holy.
You're lonely. Hey, there's a reason. There's a a response to that loneliness. He has a name.
Right.
He's beautiful. Come meet him.
Awesome.
So awesome.
You ready to roll?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
When you mark, get set, go. Stop. Mark it, set, go. This is Dan and Stephanie Burke with Divine Intimacy Radio, your radio haven of rest,
your hermitage of the heart,
your monastery of the mind, where we lift our hearts and minds to heaven to draw upon the wisdom of the saints to help us to not just survive the storm, but thrive in it and help others to do the same.
Right. Yeah. Your life is not about you.
Yeah. One of the things I love about the Apostolic VA community, live, light, and lead. Live the contemplative light, the mission, live the contemplative life. Lead, light the way to others, which is reveal it, show it, and invite them, and then personally, walk with them and help them. I almost use the accompany word, which I really don't like. But anyway, that's really what this show is about, what this book is about.
Yeah.
Is how do you progress in the interior life and stay on the narrow way and continue to make progress.
Meet the one who made you.
Right.
For an eternal relationship with him.
Which is calling. Why you exist.
Right.
Awesome. So, battles of the fifth mansion. So the fifth mansion, contextually, the person at this point is definitely past habitual mortal sin, past habitual venial sin. They're well into the illuminative way in the fifth mansion. And now the temptations shift. They are starting to shift in the fourth mansion, where he knows he can't tempt you with mortal sin quite as much. But in the fifth mansion, the temptations shift to deceptions of regarding good. He tempts you either with false goods or real goods that are not God's will. Does that make sense?
Yeah, an angel of light.
Right, which
right?
St. Paul talks about in the New Testament.
Right. And I always think it's fascinating when you consider the name of Satan, which is Lucifer. It means angel of light.
Light bearer.
Light bearer, right? And so, think of who he would have been had he not fallen.
Right.
But the Lord, makes him accomplish his will anyway in the world. And so he brings that false light because he, has all these creative ways that he can do that. But what happens is if we're awake and we're paying attention, the Lord will use that with our cooperation and our diligence to bring about greater good.
Yeah. One misconception people can have about being tempted with goods that are not God's will is that it isn't strictly true that happens in the fifth mansion. It's just very common in the fifth mansion. So for anyone going from good to better, so the moment you really begin to fight mortal sin and make good spiritual progress, if you're susceptible to this temptation, the enemy will tempt you. So even if you're not in the fifth mansion, it's a good chapter to read to understand how he tempts in this way.
Yeah, this is the reason that, I mean, you and I, it's part of our charism and the charism of Apostoli Viae, but we believe so strongly that this contemplative life, this way of mental prayer and following the Lord in this way, plus discernment of spirits, is so crucial. Because if you go into prayer and you do not discern what's happening and you're not using discernment of spirits in your everyday life and making decisions and weighing what to do, what not to do, how the enemy tempts you, self-awareness and all of this, you can really fall.
Yeah.
So discernment of spirits is just so incredibly important. And it's not to focus on the enemy. We need to understand discernment of spirits is not focusing on the devil. What it is understanding how he works against us so that we can fight, resist, and focus on the Lord.
Draw near to the Lord.
Draw near to the Lord.
The practice, the principal fruit, in my opinion, of discernment of spirits is actually understanding to hear the voice of God better.
Right.
Which is might be an unusual conclusion to draw, because some people do think it's focusing on the enemy, but the opposite, or the end result is not that. Actually, you begin to know the voices in your head and where they're coming from.
Right.
That means you know his, and you better follow him.
Right. Right.
So maybe why don't you give an example, because you've got some good stuff. Although I want to reserve that locution at the kitchen sink for next mansion, because we talk about locutions then.
Okay.
But maybe give some examples of how we're tempted to good when we're not supposed to do it. But I'll give you a second to think, because I want to just tell folks.
Okay, go ahead.
By the time this show airs, I know EWTN's religious catalog will have The Devil in the Castle in stock, and they have Spiritual Warfare and Discernment of Spirit. So you might buy the bundle and read DOS first, Discernment of Spirits first, and then read this. It'll help you.
Yeah.
And they'll have Teresa of Avila's Interior Castle too.
Yeah.
You can get all of them. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So do you have a particular event? I mean, I have something, but I don't know that it's supposed to come right now. So do you have something?
Show? No, I just wondered if you had some places where in your life you were tempted to do something good, but it was not God's will, even though it was good.
Well,
am I stumping you on a live show?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I have, so, why don't you,
okay.
I don't know where you're leading with that. I can't think of nothing's coming to mind right at the moment. So
it's really common for a person at this stage that they have a love for other souls. They have a love for people because God is really working in them. And what will happen is the enemy will bring people into their lives who are very needy and need help. And and the person has to be very careful
Mm-hmm.
as to who they choose to help,
Right.
because often they'll have a lot more people to help than they can actually help,
Right.
which is a little bit of a problem that you have
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah. Well, that happens a lot. Especially when you're giving yourself over completely to loving and serving others, right?
Which is what we do for a living, if you will. I don't know. It sounds
Right.
weird, but it's not to make money, but
No,
that's
I
our
mean
life now.
it's 24/7
Yeah.
is what we do. And one thing comes to mind, and I've had to really grapple with this and kind of deal with it, and I've seen it played out in lives of other beautiful holy people. Um and one of those is that sometimes while you are very engaged in family life. And I think this is particularly important for parents. So you have children, you're walking the way, you're trying to be holy. And I think you even talk about an example in this chapter. And so your primary vocation is your marriage. So your role as husband and wife. And then secondarily from that, it's your role as parent, your children. Everything else comes after that, right? You have to put your priorities in order. So it's daughter or son of the king, wife or husband, and then parent, right? To your children, and then everybody else, right? Work, all of that, right? I have grappled a little bit with somebody came into our life that really needed help. Now the Lord has brought tremendous good out of it, and the person is now free. We accompanied them through deliverance and all of that. But during that time, my attention shifted, and it's heartbreaking for me to admit, but it's true.
Yeah.
I was way too busy as a Catholic school principal. I was trying to be a good mother, good wife, all of that stuff, and then the Lord, this person shows up in our life, and I ended up loving and serving them very closely. During that time, the enemy took a swing at one of our kids, and got a hook in, right? And there were too many moving parts, and I was spread too thin. If I had it to do over again, I would have did it differently.
You would have still served the person.
I would have still served them, but I would have been more discerning, more distant.
You would have had more people at the table.
In. Yes. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
That would be me.
And so it created a lot of pain and suffering in our life. Now, that being said, the Lord's brought tremendous good. In fact, so much of our ministry in deliverance ministry, like now we have a ministry called Liberatio, where we do a lay type of deliverance.
Thoroughly Catholic.
So, a lot of things have been birthed out of that pain and that experience. But still, my heart grieves for the errors and the ways that I dropped the ball during that time. So that we both did, in some ways. And so what's interesting is that another part of that fruit is that we had somebody that's close to us call us and say, hey, this exorcist keeps inviting me to go help in the ministry, and wanted discernment. So we talked through it. They had a number of children, like a bunch of children, teens down to little ones, all the way down. Marriage, very busy life, all of that. And as we talked through it, I said, absolutely not. This isn't God's will. There are other people, and usually it's people that are retired that end up helping in the ministry. That they're empty nesters.
Empty nesters, yeah.
Their kids are gone,
not as vulnerable.
Right, because children are vulnerable. And if you're not keeping your eyes on what you're supposed to be doing, the enemy can come in and start taking out the weakest link, weakest link in your family. And you have to be discerning. And I love what Father Ripperger says. He says, the enemy's not under every rock. but he's under every other rock.
Yeah.
And you have to pay attention when there's a lot of movement, a lot of spiritual movement, a lot of spiritual warfare going on in your life. Be careful, because the enemy's always at work. He's always prowling. He's always looking for a soul to devour. And we don't live in fear, but we must be astute. We must pay attention. We must make sure that those primary concerns of ours as spouse, parent, all of that are covered first and thoroughly before we discern to do anything outside of that with other people. So
well said. So in this mansion, the battles often are very much about temptations to good that are not God's will, because not every good is God's will.
And it can be temptation to pride.
Yeah. If there is a good that takes you away from your primary state or does harm to your primary state in life, that is certainly not God's will. When we get back from the break, we'll talk more about the tactics of the enemy in the fifth mansion.
Okay, we'll be right back.
So what we'll shift now to is false peace. So if you go to 74,
okay.
I don't think I want to do that, the whole distinction on the mystical thing. It's too involved.
Mm-hmm.
But I think 70, the false peace thing, is something that people can really relate to.
Do you want to talk about the experience between false and true peace? Is that what you're going for, or just false peace?
We can do both. We can do both.
Okay, I can start here on 73 and open it up.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. On your mark, get set, go. This is Dan and Stephanie Burke. Welcome back to Divine Intimacy Radio, your radio haven of rest. Well, sorry. I'm jumping into the intro to the show. I really like the intro to the show.
Right.
All right. So fifth mansion, battles. How does the enemy attack holy souls, healthy souls, souls moving really in the right direction? There's another front that's really commonly surfaced. Bad,
Wow.
Can you just take over, please? Can you rescue this whole thing?
So one of the signs of this mansion of prayer is that the soul will experience more mystical experiences, right?
Yeah.
And it really starts third mansion. It can start anywhere,
but
it kind of ramps up during this time.
It's more normative.
It's more normative.
Fourth, fifth, and beyond.
Right.
Yeah, fifth and beyond in particular.
And the Lord allows this because he's drawing the soul to him.
Yeah.
Part of it is candy to draw the Lord, draw us closer to him. But then the enemy, as the can be an angel of light as well.
Yeah.
As Teresa has told us.
Feign.
Right. It can feign it. And so she says, so this is from your book. Saint Teresa notes that the enemy can also cause the soul to enter into a kind of mystical state that it might interpret is from of God, but is not from God. And the way to discern this difference involves several aspects that are described as a kind of rapture. Rather than focus excessively on the false variations of this experience, St. Teresa reveals the characteristics of an authentic contemplative encounter with God. So you start to list out, okay, so somebody has an experience. It can almost even feel like a rapture, right? And so how do you discern if that's of God or of the enemy? And so rather than focusing on whether it's from the enemy, we focus on, is it of God, right? We're testing all spirits, right? Didn't St. Paul says that?
Yeah, test all things, hold fast to that which is true. St. John, the beloved disciple, also in his epistles said to test all things. And so, yeah, that's what everything we're supposed to test. Not even, here's a tough one, right? There was a supposed mystic a few years ago that was getting a lot of traction, and a lot of good people believed in him, and I didn't. I think it's a gift of the Lord at times to give me insights that are not easy to see when there's false. But this person was magisterium faithful. was in the perception of all very humble. But from day one, I was skeptical, and then of course it ended up being proved that he was deceiving people and lying and that sort of. He even threatened me once for personally, which was weird. But the appearance of good and magisterium faithfulness are not always a sign that someone is that the mystical experiences they're relaying are from God if they're actually relaying them. I mean, I know somebody, and I won't reveal too much here, but they're in a state of habitual mortal sin. So they're very immature Christian who are just convinced they are a prophet. I'm a prophet. This is what I am. And it's because they went to some encounter thing or whatever. I don't know where they went. And the enemy keeps telling them this, and they're fully convinced. And I can tell you, because I know them reasonably well, there's no chance that they have that gift. But they're totally obsessed and distracted. And every time I talk with them, they say, I'm this, which is a clear obsession, not a true movement of God. So you've got to be really careful when you get into the realm of mystical encounters, that you judge not only the experience and the feeling, the elation that comes, which I call false peace, but the fruits that come. And you've got to really test what what it is that you think is going on by other people. If you use your own judgment, you're in trouble. And not all spiritual directors are even capable of judging these things, which is one of the reasons I wanted to write this book.
Yeah, I think it's one of the beauties of community too, or a holy marriage, where you can really stay close to someone and they can call you out and go, hey, I know that you felt this and everything, but the fruits of it, you seem angrier, you're more agitated, you've become prideful, whatever
You're obsessed.
it is. You're obsessed. There's something wrong here, and I'm concerned.
Yeah.
And please, Jesus, that the person will listen, right?
Yeah.
So the fruits need to mirror the fruits of the Holy Spirit.
And sometimes they can't be judged in the first instance, right?
No,
or in the moment. You have to watch it over time.
Yeah, over time.
So the one thing I want to make sure we get to before the end of the show is this. The worst advice most commonly given to people in the church, and everybody who does that should be taken out to should be taken out to the woodshed. And not good things happen in the woodshed to bad little boys. But that is that if you have peace, it's from God. And so I said earlier, I wish I had a buzzer that said, that was amazing. I want to have a buzzer that says,
pay attention,
like a huge buzzer noise. It is not true, folks, that if you feel peace, what you're doing is of God. That is not, nobody can judge the peace to be true or false unless they know the entire context of the person's spiritual life, or a great deal of the context of a person's spiritual life,
or whether the behavior is, moral or immoral.
Right.
Like, and I this is always a great example that you use, that if a young man is living with his girlfriend,
right,
and he's happy, right, in quotes, and in love and in peace, you can't look at that and go, oh, well, he's nice now and he seems at peace, and blah, blah, blah. But he's living in a state of mortal sin. That peace is false peace.
Yeah,
that is not of God. Yeah, that is not of God. That is the enemy. So you have to look at the morality of what's coming out of somebody's life, whether their behaviors are morally right or wrong.
Right. But even so, yes, that's an easy example. But in this state, we're not dealing with that kind of sin.
Right.
We're dealing with someone who's judging between two goods, and both the good that God wants them to do maybe is harder and is a cross, and the good that the enemy wants them to do maybe is feeds the ego. Like you talked about that person who was being asked to assist an exorcist. That's a pretty big deal. It could easily inflate your pride, and thankfully in this person it didn't, or if it did, they fought it, didn't reveal it to us. But you got to be very careful that what the Lord is drawing to you is actually his will, and your peace, or the perception of peace, or the is not necessarily a good indicator of whether or not it's God's will. It may be, but it has to be taken into account, and there are a lot of other factors.
Yeah, I think one of the most important factors is if somebody, if your priest came or your spiritual director came and said, no, you can't do this, would you submit?
Right.
Right. And if you wouldn't, if you'd put up a fight and it becomes an obsession or an attachment, that tells you that there's something wrong. Because if you have a good and holy priest and a good spiritual director, and they discern outside of you that you should not do something, if you can't submit to that, that's a bad sign. That's really a bad sign, because the Lord uses, he says he wants obedience from us.
Right.
Even when, like, the Lord respects the authority and the hierarchy of the church. He respects that. And so he's designed it. And so if we're told through Holy Mother Church, don't do that, as long as it's not telling us to go do some sinful act, we should be able to submit to that and wait on the Lord until we're given permission.
I give a personal example, at least on the positive side, about obedience and that sort of thing, is I had the opportunity to write an article on Black Lives Matter, an aspect of their public statements about their spirituality and that sort of thing. And I don't like to write. I write a lot, but I don't like doing it. It's penitential. I do it because I love the people of God and the church. But I didn't want to write the article, but I did have a special insight into what was going on and experience. And so I asked my spiritual director and a bishop friend of mine, and both of them said, not only should you, but you must. And then so I did it, which was high risk because those things can draw you into cancel culture and that sort of thing. But the point being, how I felt about it didn't determine whether or not I did it. I wasn't looking for peace to say, oh, yeah, you should do this, because I never had peace about writing that piece until both of them said you should do it. So what else really struck you in this chapter? Anything else you want to cover?
Well, I mean, going back to whether something's true or not, I think it's important that, that mystical experiences, that they tend to not be long in nature. They're rather short.
Authentic ones,
right? That in it, the person neither sees, hears, nor understands what is happening. The Lord has drawn them so close that, so they come out of it, and what they realize is something happened. They feel that it is of God. They know it is of God, and the fruit, plays out.
Fruit is the big measure.
Fruit is huge. There are no lasting thoughts associated with the encounter. That the soul experiences joy that is beyond all joys, and nothing like it has ever experienced. That they have never experienced that in their life before. Like, it's so beyond anything,
and it's usually a surprise,
right? It's not, we can't cause these things to happen. The consolations, the gifts, true mystical spiritual experiences of God cannot be created. We cannot grasp at them. We cannot do anything except prepare for them.
I think you actually had one in our last Sojourners meeting when we were reflecting on the holy sacrifice of the Mass through the lens of Scupoli and spiritual combat. And it took you totally by surprise, brought you to tears as you're experiencing it.
Right.
And I think that's a great example. You didn't expect it, and you got hit.
Right.
And it was very powerful. I mean, obviously, we don't know what was going on inside of you, but it was overwhelming to you to the point where you couldn't talk in moments. So those are some things. Other things in this chapter you'll find that will help you. Criticism. It's common for the enemy to tempt you to criticism of others in this stage because you're
prideful.
It happened earlier on. We mentioned it, but then later on it resurges. It grows again because you're making objectively a lot of spiritual progress, and he'll draw you to do that, to tempt you to be confident in your self-perception, and thus to a lack of humility. So there's a lot of other things that you can glean from this chapter. It's actually quite the last chapters in the book. The book was hard to write because it got thicker and thicker as it went on. So,
well, if we could wrap that up, we always keep in mind humility, humility, humility.
Yeah.
Okay. With that, until next time, may the God of peace make you perfect in holiness. May he preserve you whole and entire, spirit, soul, and body, irreproachable at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.